Let's bring in to discuss former spokesperson and Deputy Assistant Secretary at the Department of Homeland Security, Katie Zacharia, along with political strategist and Chief Strategic Officer and GMC Global, Elizabeth Rubel, and Democratic strategist and attorney, Jessica Ehrlich. All right, thanks for all of you for being here. Elizabeth, I want to start with you here, and welcome to American Agenda. Happy to have you with us here. You know, we're watching all of these things. It almost is difficult to keep track of why the detainees are there in the first place. It is because they were in this country illegally. So much has been made. The political theater has truly gotten out of control, as both of our reporters shared with us, that it's sometimes difficult to lose sight that the people in there are there for a reason.
They're there, and sometimes they're for a very compelling reason. I believe that it's around 70% of people who have been detained. They have already come to the country not only illegally, but they came here and they committed a crime, or they are being charged with a crime. It's difficult for me to have any kind of sympathy because I did live in France as an immigrant for 10 years and followed every letter of the law. And if I had done the same, I too would have been deported.
Totally agree. I looked that up earlier. That is correct. Most of them have committed a serious crime or have been charged with it. Why do we care if they're on a hunger strike? They're adults. They want to eat. They have, DHS has said, 3 square meals a day. Political stunt, Katie Zacharia. I don't know how else you can see this. This is not a protest. This is a riot. One of the ICE agents had his arm bit. Another guy was arrested for threatening to kill an ICE agent and his family. This is a political stunt.
Political stunt. One way you can avoid going to a detention center is self-deportation. In fact, you can use the CBP Home app and they'll send you home for free with $2,600, yet nobody is doing this. So they end up in detention centers because immigration and customs enforcement have to pick them up. Now, look, one thing that's not being said by Mikie Sherrill is if she had employed a 287G, which is a cooperation between ICE and its deputizing local police officers to do federal immigration enforcement, they would have had the backs of ICE facility right off the bat. But she didn't do that. In fact, she actively signed legislation that said you may not help ICE in these situations. So she also didn't mention in her talk that she cared anything about any federal immigration officers whose lives were at risk by these protesters. It was only those in the detention facility and keeping New Jersey safe. She is not a friend of ICE.
I don't disagree with that. I want to share what else Governor Sherrill did say. She continues, as other Democrats do, to cite the, quote, conditions within Delaney Hall. We heard Congressman Van Drew speak to that. But she mentioned specifically the food situation as the reason for the protests. Bob also mentioned this. Watch.
That's exactly where our focus needs to be right now, advocating for better conditions for those inside the facility. We can't let what's happening outside Delaney Hall take us away from that mission. I refuse to back down in fighting the Trump administration.
But the detainees have reportedly been fed everything from pancakes and eggs to chicken, fajitas, and even steak. So it seems, of course, like these conditions could just be another extension of this political theater in many ways. And to me, one of the ways to immediately dismiss concerns about the conditions or to show, wow, they really are bad is, I don't know, why don't you allow some journalists to go inside? I know our very own Sarah Williamson has been asking, hey, let me just get in there and see it. I won't even take a camera. Just let me talk to some of the detainees. She has been refused.
Well, I think that has a larger issue that they've been dealing with because there's privacy issues. And the DHS Secretary himself and Tom Homan have referred to this frequently. So there's if they can block out their faces,
yes, exactly.
You know, make sure that happens when they're talking.
That's why she said no cameras. Let me just go in. Yep.
So I think that is actually very important because there's a lot of misinformation that's floating around, and there's a lot of concern I think people have across the country, Democrats and Republicans, as to what is happening in these detention facilities. What is the procedure for processing people and separating out people who are hardened criminals from people who may be here, that were here illegally or somehow are affecting the law, but otherwise they were law-abiding citizens. So those are things that need to be addressed and are not, and there's concern. People are concerned. Now, there's a huge difference between having violent protests and having peaceful protests and saying you don't think the policy of the United States is correct.
Right, that's your
having
First
a
Amendment,
peaceful
right,
protest and then having violent protests.
Well, we saw a riot. That's what we were playing on
exactly,
TV.
and also even if any of the detainees who are in there did not commit some other crime simply by being in this country illegally,
that's
also
a crime.
committing a crime. All right.
That is a crime.
That's right. We're going to have to leave it there. All right, Katie, Elizabeth, Jessica, thank you so much.
Thank you.